Well, thanks for having me. My name's Bob Ferguson, and it's true I'm a fourth-generation Washingtonian. My great-grandparents homesteaded on the Skagit River. I think it was back in the 1880s or so. We like to say in the family, my great-grandfather, he'd come over from eastern Canada. We like to say we're not sure what he was running away from, but he went a long way to get away from it. And so he came out to what was in the middle of nowhere up near Marble Mountain. And maybe that was it, and settled and with his family, raised a family, and then eventually went to the Alaska Gold Rush. There's a whole story there, but it's kind of a fascinating story. I'm trying to learn more about in my family up there along the Skagit River. So what I'm going to do is what I did last time. I think last time I was here, I just touched on a few issues that are going on down at the county. I'll just speak for 6 or 7 minutes and then really open up to whatever questions you might have about either the issues I raised or, frankly, any issues at all. The one other thing I should mention before I get into that is I think since the last time I was here, the arrival of my twins is new for us. They're just over a year old, boy and a girl, Jack and Katie. So that's been, for those of you who have children, you can imagine what a change that is. So it's been wonderful. We really love it. Jack, his name is Jackson. He's named after Scoop Jackson, our great U.S. Senator, who was born and raised in Everett, which is where my family settled into. And so we have a boy and a girl. We're very happy, and they woke me up nice and early this morning, as they usually do. So let me touch on a couple issues real quick, and again, feel free to ask about these issues or, frankly, anything else when we open it up to questions. So I suppose I should start with the county's budget situation. I suspect any elected official you might have come speak to you, whether a local government or statewide or at the federal level, the budget's going to be on their mind, and I suspect just about everybody's mind. We're having struggles from a budget standpoint, just like everybody else is, whether it's a business or a company or individuals. And last year, when we put together our budget, we have what we call a general fund of about $660 million. The general fund pays for services like the criminal justice, the courts, the jails, the prosecutors, the defense attorneys, all that. The criminal justice system comes out of the general fund. Our elections department is paid for out of the general fund. My salary, anything we might do with human services, for example, senior centers, anything along those lines, public health, all comes out of the general fund, so some really key services. The general fund, though, has been facing significant budget challenges. Last year, we cut $93 million from that $660 million general fund. Those are big cuts. If 70%, really 73%, go to criminal justice, inevitably some of those cuts will have to go to criminal justice, and those are cuts that, frankly, folks don't want to have to make. So we had $93 million cuts from our general fund last year. As we get ready for our budget cycle this fall, which is when we put together our budget every fall, we receive a proposed budget from the executive in September, and then we have a couple months to work it out. We anticipate now from that same budget, $45 million shortfall, $50 million shortfall. The number is still being worked out. But we're heavily impacted by a decrease in sales tax revenues is obviously an impact on us as well. So from that, we'll be cutting another $50 million. That number could change, but the relatively easy cuts, none of the cuts are easy, but some of the relatively easy cuts were made last year. The $45 or $50 million we make this coming year will be difficult for sure. So we're doing our best to avoid cutting deputies being on the streets, real critical law, justice, safety issues, but there's challenges to that. There's no getting around it. I'm happy to speak in more detail about any of that if you like. Our elections department is an important one for all citizens, and back in 2004 we had a troubled election, as you all know. The good news is since then we've had, I think, a number of successes at the elections department. We have a new facility now. It's located down in Renton. It's a very high state-of-the-art facility. Actually, people come from all around the country to see our facility in Renton, which is a far cry from where we were a few years ago. We were housed downtown, but also we had multiple locations. And in a review of the 2004 election, I'd asked for an outside independent audit to come in, some experts in elections to come in and take a look at what happened in 2004. One of their primary recommendations was get all your elections operations in one location. We are spread out in different locations. So we have a new location in Renton. Land was cheaper there, able to put together a facility that suited our needs very well. And since 2004, our elections have gone much, much better. There have been lots of reforms that have taken place in our elections office that I worked very hard on with some of my colleagues, and I think it's been a big improvement. One change that you will be seeing and have just started to see a little bit is a transition to all-mail elections. So King County is either the last, or there may be one other county, I think, who still has polling locations. But we're the last or second to last to make the transition to all-mail. So if you're voting anywhere else in Washington State virtually, you're in all-mail elections. In Oregon, you're in all-mail election. So in King County, we're moving to all-mail elections. Another change is, and that'll happen when you vote this August and November, it'll be an all-mail election. Another change is we have an elected elections director. In the past, that's been an appointed position by the executive branch and the county council. That's now an elected position. Cheryl Huff was elected in a special election in February, I think it was, this year. We had a special election in which she was elected as the elected elections director. That again makes us consistent with all other counties have elected elections director. Our state, obviously, we have an elected elections officer at the statewide level. So that's another change. There have been some changes down to the elections department. Vote by mail, I know it's been a little bit controversial. Some people, my mom, for example, loves voting at her polling location, the library in Queen Anne Hill, where she's gone for 50 years. But going to one system, all-mail system, I do think will make our system more efficient, focused on one way of doing business. And frankly, about 75%, even sometimes 80% of people in any given election were voting by mail anyway and not going to the polls. So for those of you who do go to the polls, it's anything like my polling location in my precinct, it's virtually empty all day long. People were voting by mail anyway, so it's very expensive, as you might imagine, to have these polling locations, the polling workers, the training that goes into all that, and the ballot handling there, having two different systems, but one, the vote by mail, that most people were using. One other one I'll touch on real briefly, and that's transportation. For King County, one thing we handle is Metro Transit. We're a regional government as well, so we're involved in things like Sound Transit. Some members serve on the Sound Transit Board. I'm not one of them, but some do. But when it comes to transportation, where we have a very direct impact is Metro Transit. That's something that we actually operate. And Metro, their funding is heavily related to sales tax revenues. Metro's gone to voters in previous years for an increase in sales tax for additional Metro service. I think the last was 2 years ago. Voters have supported that traditionally. With sales tax revenues down, and last year we had that big spike in oil prices, that obviously had a big hit on Metro. Metro's budget has taken a big hit. They're looking at approximately an $80 million shortfall for out years going forward. That's a big bite out of service potentially. So there's not a lot of good news here. Bottom line is Metro had proposed some significant fare increases. The executive branch, I should say, had proposed some significant fare increases. My feeling along with some of my members was we went along with the 25-cent fare increase initially, but felt that we should have an audit of Metro's operations, which frankly we're time for anyway. Take a look at our Metro operations and where we could find greater efficiencies in our operations. That worked very well with our elections department to see how we could do that better. I'm optimistic that in examining Metro's budget, which is a big operation, big budget, that we should find some efficiencies where we can use, frankly, your taxpayer dollars as efficiently as possible to make sure that we don't have to raise fares any more than necessary. So, in transportation, I might add, that's going around the country. There was an article in the New York Times not too long ago talking about transit operations around the country and the impacts that the budget situation's having on them as well. So I take the bus to work virtually every day unless I'm coming up, for example, for a meeting like this. I take the 41 from Northgate, and my bus is packed every day these days. More and more people are using Metro Transit, which is a bit of the irony. More and more people are using transit, partly because the economy is going down, so more and more people are turning to transit. My bus is more crowded, but our ability to provide that service is compromised right now with the projected shortfalls. So we look to get the audit results back sometime this year and hope to implement some of those efficiencies as soon as possible. So those are sort of three big issues that are going on down at the county right now, and I'll stop there. I don't want to go on talking too long, and frankly open up any questions you might have about those issues or really anything you might be on your mind at all.